When I was in my early 20s, a saying stuck with me: big dreams are born on the streets of Los Angeles. That single phrase ignited a spark in me, convincing me that my path to success lay in the city of angels. The idea took root, growing stronger with time, until at 22, I finally made the move. Initially, everything seemed perfect, but I soon learned that dreams in Los Angeles weren't as radiant as I had imagined. This story revolves around my best friend, Carla, and the nightmare that unfolded one unforgettable night. A night that changed everything and made me question the choices that brought me to LA. Carla and I had known each other since childhood. Our mothers were lifelong friends, and even though Carla moved to LA at 9, our bond stayed strong. She was ecstatic when I decided to join her there, and those first months together were a whirlwind of excitement. Carla was a local celebrity of sorts, known in her neighborhood as Reina de la Fiesta because of her knack for attending the most talked about events in LA. Carla's ultimate dream was to become an actress, and she believed networking at these parties would get her closer to success. She invited me to every event, and those nights were full of unforgettable experiences until one evening took a horrifying turn. Carla had scored an invitation to one of the most exclusive parties in Hollywood, hosted by none other than Sean Puff Daddy Combs. His parties were legendary, almost mythical in their reputation. When Carla told me she'd managed to get us both in, thanks to a friend of a friend who worked for him, I could hardly believe it. We spent the entire day getting ready. Carla was over the moon, convinced it would be the night that defined our Hollywood story. The party was at Combs' mansion in the Hollywood Hills. We arrived around 10:30 p.m., later than planned. At the entrance, security asked us to hand over our phones, explaining that photos and videos were prohibited without the host's consent. Reluctantly, we complied. Inside, the mansion was dazzling, with music, bright lights, and the intoxicating mix of expensive perfumes and celebrity allure. It felt like stepping into another world. However, things grew unsettling quickly. We were escorted to a table where we were handed confidentiality agreements to sign. Carla didn't hesitate, but I couldn't help reading through it first. Certain clauses stood out, particularly one stating that the agreement was binding for life and even extended 20 years after death. Carla convinced me to sign, brushing off my concerns. Against my better judgment, I relented. Moments later, a man led us deeper into the mansion, to a private room. As the doors opened, I froze. The room resembled a twisted dungeon filled with people engaged in disturbing acts. Some participants were bleeding, others hung from the ceiling. I had heard of dark fetishes involving blood, but witnessing it firsthand was utterly horrifying. Sean Combs appeared, intoxicated and charismatic, addressing us as special guests and leading us further into the nightmare. He hinted that we were about to witness something exclusive. Guards soon ushered us into another room, one far worse than the first. What unfolded next was a scene of unimaginable depravity, involving acts too disturbing to describe fully. To my horror, Carla, emboldened by alcohol, agreed to participate in what was called La Piñata, an extreme BDSM game involving physical violence. She was stripped and bound, and though she initially seemed thrilled, her joy quickly turned to terror. As the crowd grew more frenzied, I watched helplessly while Carla screamed for it to stop. The guards restrained me when I tried to intervene. The game turned brutal. Carla's cries filled the room, drowned out by the deafening music and laughter. She collapsed unconscious. Combs ordered the room cleared, assuring everyone that the situation was under control. I followed as they carried her lifeless body out, but the guards stopped me, reminding me of the contract I had signed. The next day, Carla was gone. Her family reported her missing, but no answers came. I tried reaching out to the people involved, but I was met with threats. I was forced to lie to Carla's family, telling them she had left town, a lie that haunts me to this day. Though years have passed, I can't escape the guilt. Carla vanished, swallowed by a darkness that still looms over me. Combs' parties eventually came under scrutiny, and horrifying details began to surface, but justice remains elusive. I share this story anonymously, hoping to shed light on the horrors hidden behind the glitz of Hollywood. It all began on my 19th birthday, a day that would haunt me forever. A friend of mine, a regular pot smoker, convinced me to try some of his stash, as he used to call it, the good stuff. Looking back, it was a foolish decision, one that would cost me dearly. That morning at school, I decided to celebrate my birthday with a sleepover at my house. I invited my two best friends, Enzo and Patrick. Enzo and I had been inseparable since we were kids, always in the same class. Patrick, on the other hand, was a year younger but no less important. Our connection was strong, and we often kept in touch despite any distance. In high school, we were all classmates, which made it easier to stay close. In my country, high school ends at 19, so this was also a milestone birthday for me. Around 9 a.m., as I was picking up my books, Enzo approached me. We greeted each other casually and started chatting about the day ahead. Suddenly, Enzo changed the subject and brought up my party. "Hey, thanks for inviting me to your house tonight," he said. "Of course, buddy. I can't spend my birthday without you," I replied with a smile. "Cool, because I got you a special gift," Enzo said, grinning. "Really? What is it?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "You'll love it, but it's a surprise," he teased. "All right, I love surprises. Keep it a secret until tonight," I responded playfully. He smiled and then asked, "By the way, did you invite anyone else?" "Yeah, Patrick is coming too. I wanted to invite more people, but after last year's chaos, my parents wouldn't let me," I explained. "Oh, I remember that. It was wild," Enzo said, laughing. "Yeah, they were furious when Patrick broke that window. Anyway, remember, 8 p.m. at my house," I reminded him as we parted ways for class. At the time, I didn't think much about Enzo's gift. I assumed it was just a bottle of liquor, our usual go-to for birthdays. Back then, I was someone who loved to drink and party, so alcohol seemed like a safe bet. After school, I went home to prepare for the evening. My parents had taken a trip, trusting me to have a small, controlled gathering. I spent the afternoon setting up, putting on music, arranging mattresses, ordering pizza, and then lounged on the couch waiting for my friends to arrive. At around 8:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. I jumped up to greet them. "Hey, I was starting to get worried," I said, opening the door. "Relax, don't act like my mum," Enzo joked. "Here's your present." "We were late because we took the wrong bus," Patrick added. "Well, since you're here, let's start drinking," I said eagerly. "Oh, come on, that's so boring," Enzo said, surprising me. For a moment, I thought he had grown out of his partying habits, but then he smirked and added, "I've got something way more exciting for you, birthday boy." My excitement was mixed with apprehension, but I ushered them inside. We went up to my room and I closed the curtains for privacy. Enzo sat us down in a circle, then pulled a small bag from his backpack. "What's that?" I asked. "Ecstasy," Enzo said with a mischievous grin. "A friend got it for me. It's the real deal." I was taken aback. I had always been curious about ecstasy, mostly because people claimed it wasn't dangerous. Back then, it was still relatively new, and there wasn't much awareness of how lethal it could be. Besides, I trusted Enzo. Against my better judgment, I agreed to try it. Enzo assured us that it was a clean dose, enough to have fun. Without much hesitation, I took one. Patrick did the same. Enzo, however, decided to take 2 right away. We sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and waited for the effects to kick in. After about 20 minutes, I started feeling a strange pain in my stomach. My friends, on the other hand, seemed unaffected. "Do you feel anything?" I asked Patrick. "No, nothing yet," he replied. "Maybe they don't work. Let's take another one," Enzo suggested. "No, I think I'll pass. I'm already feeling a bit off," I said, clutching my stomach. Little did I know that my discomfort would end up saving my life. Ignoring my hesitation, Enzo and Patrick took more pills. As time passed, the pain in my stomach intensified, and I started feeling nauseous. I glanced over at my friends and noticed something alarming. Patrick was blinking rapidly, his movements slowing down unnaturally. "Hey Patrick, are you okay?" I asked. He didn't respond. Saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth, and his hands began trembling. His eyes started to close. "Patrick, can you hear me?" I shouted, panic rising. His silence was chilling. Then he collapsed onto the floor, convulsing violently. "Enzo, look at Patrick! What's happening to him?" I screamed. Enzo, now visibly unwell himself, mumbled incoherently. Before I could process what was happening, Patrick's convulsions stopped. His body went still, his eyes wide open but lifeless. Foam bubbled from his mouth. I shook him frantically, shouting his name, but he didn't respond. His skin turned pale, and I couldn't feel a pulse. "Enzo, help me! Patrick isn't breathing," I yelled. Enzo was too far gone, rocking back and forth in a daze. Desperation took over as I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and took us to the hospital. Patrick was rushed to one room, while Enzo and I were placed in another. I was exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually falling into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the atmosphere was somber. Nurses whispered nearby, and that's when I learned the devastating news. Patrick hadn't survived. My world shattered. Guilt and grief consumed me. Enzo, though alive, had been severely affected. We later learned that the pills were laced with PMA, a far more toxic substance than ecstasy. Patrick had taken a fatal dose. In the aftermath, Enzo was sentenced to 5 years in prison for distributing the pills. I was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 100 hours of community service. My parents were furious and heartbroken, their trust in me completely destroyed. The pain of that night haunted me for years. Nightmares, anxiety, and guilt clung to me like shadows. It took a long time to rebuild my life and find some semblance of peace. But one thing is certain, that birthday changed me forever. "Welcome to the party," I shouted excitedly as my friends arrived. There were only 4 of them, 3 guys and a girl. I wanted to put together something cool, and even though we weren't that close, I figured that was enough to invite them to my birthday party. I had ordered several boxes of pizza and drinks by the truckload, and the speakers were blaring with electronic music, just what we needed to set the mood. I set up the video game and started playing with the guys, while Alexa, the girl in the group, walked over to the speakers and started dancing. She was dating Kevin, and she was going all out. Every now and then, he would look up from the game to smile at her, and I couldn't help but notice that Douglas, one of the other guys, was sneaking glances at Alexa. I smiled inwardly, watching the situation. It felt like a spontaneous love triangle was brewing. After a while, Alexa convinced Kevin to join her on the makeshift dance floor in my living room. Soon they were dancing with ridiculous steps that had us all laughing. The party was taking a nice turn so far, and I wished it had stayed that way. A few minutes later, Kevin asked where the bathroom was, so I pointed him in the right direction. He left, saying he'd be a while, and I kept playing while Alexa moved to the beat of different songs. That's when Douglas walked up to her, grabbed her by the waist, and started dancing with her. Mason, the last of the guys, and I exchanged a look. I simply shrugged before taking a sip of my beer. If Douglas wanted to flirt with his friend's girlfriend, it wasn't my problem. If he did though, he might end the night with a black eye. Alexa smiled at him, and soon they didn't seem to care about the rest of us. Mason and I watched intently as Douglas lowered his head and kissed her. My eyes widened in surprise. It wasn't a discreet kiss, but a very passionate one, butt squeeze and all. "Are you serious?" Mason muttered. Kevin could be back any moment, and they were doing this right there. Mason and I were flabbergasted, but Alexa and Douglas seemed lost in their own world. Suddenly we heard a door slam. Alexa quickly pulled away and untangled herself from Douglas as Kevin entered the room. Kevin had no idea what had just happened. Douglas and Alexa were both breathing heavily, but avoided looking at each other. Mason and I pretended to be engrossed in the game as Alexa ran over to Kevin and hugged him, trying to break the tension. "Hey, I have a pool table in the basement," I commented. That made Kevin and Mason's faces light up, and they eagerly headed downstairs. Douglas followed and Alexa joined them. I stayed in the living room for a while, finishing up the video game. After some time, Douglas came back in with a disheveled look on his face. I didn't say anything, but I suspected he had been with Alexa. Shortly after, Mason joined me, and we continued playing games and having a few beers. A couple of hours passed until Kevin burst into the room with an angry expression. "Who the hell is the son of a bitch who slept with my girl?" he roared, glaring at everyone. We all froze, trying to act surprised while resisting the urge to look at Douglas. Alexa was crying, her makeup smeared, staring at the floor and biting her lip. "Answer me," Kevin shouted again. I threw my hands up. "Calm down, brother," I said, trying to defuse the situation. But he wasn't listening. Suddenly, he pulled a pistol from the waistband of his pants and pointed it at us. We froze. My breath hitched. Kevin was a little drunk, but I hoped he had enough sense to drop the gun. Judging by his furious expression, though, I wasn't so sure. The atmosphere became tense, and the fun of the party dissolved into sheer terror. I had never been in a situation like this before, only seen it in movies. My mind raced, trying to recall what the heroes did in films, but I wasn't a hero, and I was too scared to move. Mason, who seemed to have more sense, slowly backed away while calmly talking to Kevin, asking him to lower the gun, but that only enraged him further. Kevin started firing wildly. When I heard the first shot, Alexa screamed. I watched in horror as the vase near the game console shattered into pieces. Each gunshot echoed through the house. I ducked behind furniture, trying to shield myself as Kevin's shots narrowly missed me. Suddenly the gun stopped firing. All we heard were empty clicks. Douglas laughed loudly, perhaps out of sheer panic or stupidity. His laughter was contagious, and Mason and I couldn't help but laugh too. It was a stupid decision. It only made Kevin angrier. With bloodshot eyes, Kevin dropped the gun, reached into his boot, and pulled out a knife. The laughter evaporated instantly. Kevin charged at Douglas, who screamed as he tried to fend him off. Mason, in an act of bravery, jumped in to protect Douglas. He pulled Kevin back, but Kevin spun around and stabbed Mason in the shoulder. Time seemed to stop. Mason screamed in pain, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. "I'm going to have the last laugh, you bastards!" Kevin yelled. I stayed hidden behind the couch, terrified, while Alexa sobbed silently beside me. Then, as if by a miracle, the front door burst open and 2 police officers stormed in with guns drawn. "Hands up!" they shouted. Kevin dropped the knife and was tackled to the ground. He struggled but was no match for the officers, who handcuffed him and ended the chaos. The neighbors had called the police after hearing the gunshots, and they had arrived just in time. The officers called an ambulance for Mason and Douglas, who were taken away for treatment. Alexa, pale and trembling, avoided everyone's gaze. The officers took our statements and escorted Kevin to their patrol car. As I cleaned up the house, still shaking, I reflected on the disaster of the night. Why had I invited people I barely knew into my home? I took an aspirin, trying to calm my nerves, and decided to move on. One thing was for sure, I would never see that crazy bunch again. That night had been a disaster, and nothing would ever be the same again. This was more than 3 decades ago now, and I still shudder to remember it. My wife Lissa and I were invited to spend the night at the mountain cabin of our friends Tom and Sarah. They had recently gotten engaged and wanted to celebrate with us, as well as my brother Brian and his girlfriend Sophia. Brian offered to drive us all. When we arrived at the cabin, located in a beautiful forest, we parked on the road and went inside to say hello. It was around 7 p.m, and Sarah had prepared a delicious dinner. We sat down to eat, chat, and reminisce about old times, and then played some board games, accompanied by wine and snacks. I don't know exactly what time it was, but I think it was around 10 p.m, when suddenly we heard a knock on the door. We all looked at each other in confusion, and I asked if they were expecting someone else. Tom answered no. However, Sarah went over and opened the door, and I stood beside her. There stood a girl who looked to be in her 20s. The young woman appeared pale and had dark circles under her eyes. She told us that her truck had broken down and she needed help. Behind her, we saw a guy in the driveway waving his hand from inside the truck with the hood open. Brian and I looked at Tom, who offered to go down and take a look at the vehicle. Meanwhile, the girl came inside, and the first thing she did was ask if there was any food. We were all shocked by the weirdness of the situation, but Sarah, ever gracious, replied that she had leftovers from dinner and offered her a banana. The girl started devouring it immediately, as if she hadn't eaten for days. We tried to make some small talk with her, but her answers were vague and she didn't seem interested in conversation. It was a strange feeling. Although we were in a cozy place, the atmosphere became uncomfortable with her presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something odd about the situation, something that didn't fit. However, we decided to go on with our evening, thinking it was just a minor inconvenience. What we didn't know was that it was just the beginning of a nightmare we would never forget. As the girl gorged herself on food, I felt uneasy. I looked out the window to see how they were doing with the repair, but there was no sign of Tom or the girl's supposed husband. I told Brian we needed to go check the car. He agreed, and we went down the driveway, sharing our suspicions about the girl. When we got to the car, we found a toolbox lying on the ground and a pile of tools scattered around. We called for Tom several times but were met with silence. By then, it was almost 11 p.m, and the night had grown darker. Without flashlights, it was hard to see anything. Brian suggested we call the police, but just as we were heading back, a piercing scream stopped us in our tracks. It was coming from the cabin. Without thinking, we ran back as fast as we could. When we entered, we were met with a terrifying sight. The girl who had arrived was kicking and screaming at the bathroom door with a knife in her hand. Brian and I immediately pinned her down and took the knife away. While Brian held her, I went to check on the girls. Sarah was injured on her arm, but the cut didn't look serious. Lissa and Sophia were fine, though visibly frightened. I asked about Tom, but no one had any idea where he was. Lissa tried to call the police, but the line was dead. I decided we had to tie the girl up while we figured out what to do. Sarah pointed me to the shelf where the flashlights were, and Brian and I left the house determined to find Tom. We told the girls we would be back in 20 minutes and that they should be safe. Brian and I went back down into the woods. After some time searching, we came across a downed telephone pole. Someone did this, I thought. That explained why we couldn't contact the police. We need to get back now, I said to Brian, and we started running toward the cabin. As we approached, we heard 2 gunshots echo through the forest. We froze, stunned for a moment, then wasted no time and sprinted back. When we reached the end of the road, we froze. The truck was gone along with Tom's toolbox. With no time for questions, we hurried back to the cabin. But when we entered, we found it empty. Sarah, Lissa, Sophia, all gone. The girl we'd tied up was also gone. We searched every room, the courtyard, everywhere, but there was no trace of them. It was as if they had been swallowed by the earth. Without wasting more time, Brian and I jumped into his car and drove to the nearest police station. We told the officers everything, but they didn't seem to know how to handle it. They organized a search, but it yielded nothing. The rest of the night was a blur of uneasiness as we waited for updates. I don't want to go into details, but the search was a disaster. We never learned what happened to the girls or to Tom. That night at the cabin has haunted me my whole life. I have no answers. I only know that everything changed for us that night. Brian and I remain close, bonded by the horror we experienced. But sometimes the questions are worse than the answers. We will never forget what happened that night. Europe had been an incredible experience. I honestly thought, why didn't I do it sooner? I always believed Italy was my favorite place, but now Spain seemed to be winning. While at my motel, I decided to look for the nearest restaurant, and the super friendly receptionist recommended one only 5 minutes away. The Yelp reviews were very positive, so I took the plunge. When I arrived, I was amazed by the design of the place. The architecture was impressive, one of those things that truly fascinate me about Spain. Just as I approached, a security guy held the door open for me, and as I entered, I apologized for keeping the waitress waiting, who, with a big smile, told me it was no problem. I found a place in a quiet corner and sat down to look at the menu, trying to decide what to order. Just then, 2 girls came in, laughing as if they were the happiest people in the world. The waitress came to take my order, and as I looked up from the menu, I saw that the same girls were standing right in front of me. The blonde smiled and in a playful tone said to me, "You took our place, but you look new here, so I'll let it slide." I quickly introduced myself to them. "Oh, sorry, I'm Nate. It's nice to meet you." The blonde shook my hand, smiling, and told me her name was Pera. The other girl, more shy and dark-haired, introduced herself as Dora. "Nice to meet you. What brings you to Spain?" I asked, trying to break the ice. Pera, the blonde, told me they were here on vacation and asked me about my trip. I told them that I had decided to take a sabbatical from college after my 3rd year, that it had all been very spontaneous, and that I had started in Italy, enjoying the best pizza of my life. Then I went through France and saw the Eiffel Tower before arriving in Amsterdam. They were thrilled. "Oh my gosh, you look like you're having so much fun," exclaimed Pera, visibly jealous. "I want that too," added Dora, a bit discouraged. No, don't be sad," I said, trying to cheer them up. "There's plenty of time ahead." The mood felt light, full of laughter and camaraderie. Before I knew it, Pera asked if I would mind exchanging numbers. I agreed and we shared our contacts. 3 days later, I got a text from Pera that said, "Hey newbie, wanna hang out with us? Come to the place I tagged you." Without thinking, I replied that I would come right away. I jumped out of bed, took a long, refreshing shower, and picked out my best blue vintage shirt with shorts. Watching myself in the mirror, I thought, "You're a good guy, Nate." I walked out of the hotel feeling the refreshing Spanish breeze on my skin and laughed as I put on my sunglasses. This is going to be a great day, I thought as I followed the directions on my phone. The place was about 20 minutes away, so I called an Uber. As I waited, I got lost in my thoughts, remembering what I was like as a teenager and how much I'd grown since then. I had made some choices I regretted, especially about Gloria. I wondered where she would be now. The sound of the car horn brought me out of my thoughts. I got into the car, shared the address with the driver, and relaxed. As we approached the place Pera had tagged, I enjoyed the ride, taking in the beautiful surroundings. I couldn't help but admire the architecture of each building we passed. Upon arriving, the driver, with a strong Spanish accent, told me we had arrived. I thanked him with a smile, left a nice tip, and confirmed the location on my phone. I saw an impressive apartment block in front of me, with a carefully crafted design. I texted Pera to let her know I was already there. She responded, asking me to take the elevator to the 3rd floor and ring the doorbell at apartment 40. With my heart racing, I rode up in the elevator, excited to see what adventures awaited me. Arriving at the apartment, I rang the doorbell. To my surprise, it was Dora who opened the door, smiling shyly. "Welcome to our beautiful abode," she said, inviting me in. I looked around, marveling at the decor. "Wow, this place is great," I said, admiring the details. Pera, coming from the kitchen with a glass of wine, joined the conversation. "Our roommate takes care of all this," she said. "Oh, you have 3 rooms. That sounds great," I replied, taking a sip of wine from the glass she offered me. She pointed to a comfortable couch in the living room, and I settled in. Dora walked in with cookies and brownies. "Looks like you have a nice afternoon planned," I smiled, taking a cookie. "Of course, you've got to enjoy the weather in Spain. It's all courtesy of us," she replied, pulling out some pills that appeared to be joy pills. "Take one of these," Pera said with a smile. Without thinking, I took it, popping it in my mouth and chasing it down with a gulp of wine. The pills started to take effect quickly. I ate a couple of brownies and had a few shots of tequila. Pera and Dora seemed fine, not as euphoric as I was, but I figured they were holding back. After a while, the mix of alcohol and drugs got the better of me, and I fell asleep on the couch. I don't know how long I was asleep, but when I opened my eyes, my head was exploding with a horrible headache. As I tried to stand up to get water, I realized I was tied to a chair in what appeared to be an old warehouse. What the hell is going on? I thought. Remembering the mix of alcohol and drugs, why would Pera and Dora do this? What do they want from me? Suddenly I heard footsteps. I looked toward the door and froze as I saw someone I wasn't expecting. Gloria, with a sinister smile, was walking toward me. "You must be wondering how you fell into this," she said. "You see, Pera and Dora are my roommates. They told me about this boy they met, and the description fit you perfectly." She started laughing as she spoke. "So I told them how you cheated on me with that girl and how you left me. Then we decided you should learn your lesson. Come on, guys," she yelled, and 2 huge men entered carrying a big box. Icy fumes came out of the box, chilling me to the core. "Please, Gloria, you don't have to do this. It was all a big mistake," I begged, struggling to free myself. Without mercy, they shoved me into the box. "No! No!" I screamed as I felt the cold metal closing around me. Then I heard a click on the lock and Gloria's last words echoing in my mind. "See you in hell, loser." Suddenly, everything went dark. My body froze and time seemed to stop. Moments later, I regained consciousness. I heard music and laughter in the distance. The girls were partying as if nothing had happened. Fortunately, I still had my phone. With what little strength I had left, I sent a message to my hotel receptionist with my location. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up in a hospital bed. The receptionist had seen my message and alerted the police. The Guardia Civil officers had responded to my SOS. I felt immense relief, but also a heavy heart. I had always been a firm believer in karma and regretted deceiving Gloria. However, what she did to me was pure evil. I'm now 24, but the events from 10 years ago are still vivid in my mind. Here's a bit of context. When I was 14, I was unusually tall for my age, standing at 5 feet 9 inches. Because of this, people often mistook me for being 17 or 18. At that time, I lived with my uncle Alex, his wife, their 2 daughters, and my grandmother. My uncle owned a pool and spa maintenance business, which included cleaning, repairs, and chemical deliveries. He was a kind and well-liked person, known for his excellent relationships with his clients. Our home was located in a wealthy neighborhood in Southern California, where the weather was almost always sunny and rarely dropped below 27 degrees Celsius. Uncle Alex had a number of affluent clients. One day, a middle-aged woman, one of his clients, invited him to a Halloween party at her house. She extended the invitation to him, his family, and me. Since Alex loved Halloween and scaring people, he eagerly accepted. Although I wasn't fond of parties, I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to assist him with his haunted maze. The party was filled with good food and fun, but I stayed close to my family, enjoying it in my own quiet way. The excitement grew as the time neared for the haunted maze to open. Alex and I went to get ready. He went off to a secluded spot while I changed in the guest room. My costume was a short Victorian-style dress, stained with fake blood as if I had been hanged from a tree. The idea behind the maze was that small groups of people would enter one at a time, and we would be the distractions so that no one would focus on Alex, who would be dressed as Michael Myers with a real chainsaw. He'd wait in the shadows, ready to pop out and scare anyone who got close. The night started off well, but things didn't stay that way for long. While I was in position, I began hearing murmuring and laughter from the dark path ahead. There were 5 men in the group. Their voices sounded slurred and a bit awkward, which made me suspect they had been drinking. The hostess had been serving alcohol throughout the night. As their laughter grew louder, it became more unsettling. One of them shouted something too loudly, sending a chill down my spine. Unconsciously, I began to worry about what could go wrong, but I quickly tried to calm myself, thinking most of the guests were too drunk to pose any real danger. Just then, I saw one of the men break away from the group, seemingly brave enough to venture out alone. He walked toward the maze, and I prepared to greet them as they arrived. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I sensed a change in the atmosphere. The air felt heavier and something felt off. By the time the group reached the maze, Alex was ready. He turned on his chainsaw and with a roar emerged from the shadows. The group screamed in shock, and there was some nervous laughter as they scattered, trying to escape. It was fun watching them jump in fear, but a strange feeling lingered in the air, as if something was wrong. Despite the fun continuing, my sense of unease grew stronger. With each group that entered the maze, I felt more and more on edge, wondering if maybe some of the guests weren't just there to have fun. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. Suddenly, one of the men laughed and made a disturbing comment. "Look at that girl," he slurred, and my heart dropped. I was the only one in sight, and it was clear he was talking about me. I tried to peek into the darkness, but could only see shadows. The bright spotlight in my position left me nearly blind. As they got closer, I could just make out their outlines. One of them said, "Wow, it's just a little girl," and chills ran down my spine. Despite being taller than them, I knew I was outnumbered and vulnerable. They closed in, laughing as they showed their partially illuminated faces. One of them stepped forward and said, "Hey baby," as he came within inches of me. "How about you join us? Get out here and have some fun." Terrified, I finally found my voice and told him to get away from me. But instead of backing off, he just laughed, and his behavior grew more sinister. "Don't be like that," he said, as his friends surrounded me. I felt trapped, panic rising inside me. I looked around, hoping to see Alex, but he was nowhere to be found. He must have been chasing another group ahead of me. The man closed in further, and I slapped his hand away, shouting, "Get away!" My heart was racing as I tried to turn and run, but they blocked my escape. "Aren't we good enough for you?" One of them taunted, grabbing my arm. The situation felt more and more impossible, and adrenaline surged through my body. I screamed, hoping someone would hear me and come to my aid. Then the sound of a chainsaw roared through the air. The men immediately turned and retreated into the darkness. From the shadows, I saw Alex dressed as Michael Myers, chainsaw in hand, his face set with determination. At that moment, I had never been so relieved to see a fictional killer. "What are you doing to my niece?" Alex shouted, quickly moving toward the men. I almost cried from relief, but I could see the fear on their faces. Alex, who is 6 feet 4 inches with a solid build, really intimidated them with his costume. They tried to back away, but one of them smiled nervously. "It's okay, man. We were just messing around," one of the men said, his voice shaky. He glanced back at me, his smile turning sinister. "We'll see you later, baby." His hand brushed my stomach and I froze, goosebumps running down my spine. The men turned and ran off as Alex cursed and threatened to call the police. After the tension settled, Alex pulled me into a hug, and I started to cry from the terror I had just experienced. "You're safe," he assured me. I couldn't stop shaking from the adrenaline. He quickly dialed my grandmother, and she arrived moments later. Together, the three of us went to find the hostess and report what had happened. Sadly, I don't think she could do much. I could barely describe the men since they had been mostly in the shadows. Even now, years later, I still wonder what might have happened if Alex hadn't arrived just in time at that Halloween party.